Moving on, the next important point which he wants to convey through the essay is the role of language as a medium in art, in the literary form, right? So he says that living authority which language needs lies in truth in its scholars who, recognizing always that every language possesses a genius, a very fastidious genius of its own, expand at once and purify its very elements, which must needs change along with the changing thoughts of living people. So he says that the use of language is like this available medium to the writer or the poet or the literature. How they use it is completely up to them, right? So, how does the poet use language, in fact? Because language has always kind of been there, and it has its own features. It has words that are encoded with meaning, but it depends on the genius of the writer as to how he or she wants to use language. And it's a very fastidious genius. That fastidious would mean a very fussy kind of genius, you know, that the writer is he or she makes a lot of fuss when they use language, because they want to master or be perfect in the art of using language. So, the responsibility of using language in a particular way to create a piece of art, a literary text, is lies completely with the writer, and language cannot be used in the same manner by writers. It has to change with society, it has to change with culture, it has to change with changing times, right? And then he again goes on to give the example of Wordsworth, and he says, for example, 90 years ago, so Walter Pater happened 90 years after Wordsworth. He says 90 years ago, for instance, great mental force was certainly needed by Wordsworth to break through the consecrated poetic associations of a century and speak the language that was his. So it could not have been easy for Wordsworth. Wordsworth did something extremely radical. He just broke away from tradition. He used the same language but in a completely different manner, right? To create something completely different, something completely new, something people were not expecting, and something very fresh. So, that is how the writer should use language as a tool, right? Not even as a tool. Actually, language is the base on which the writer's art, the writer's ability to handle language should come across, and that is the determining factor of good art, right? And he says, of course, the chief stimulus of good style is to possess a full, rich, complex matter to grapple with. So, no one is denying that the subject on which you are writing should be good. It should be heavy, it should be complex. So, no one is denying that. But at the same time, uh, it is the language, it is the form which will give the product its final semblance or its appearance. Hmm? So, as the scholar is nothing without the historic sense, he will apt to restore not really obsolete or really worn out words, but the finer edge of words still in use. So, what he's saying is that though the topic, the subject matter on around which the art is being made needs to be important, the use of language, linguistic experimentations which writers engage in is also equally important. The writer should be willing to experiment with language. So if we transfer this metaphor to that of the sculptor, so you have a block of stone, and you have these sculpting tools with the sculptor, right? uh, Now the sculptor, for example, till date it has only been Greek figures which have been carved in stone. Now the sculptor wants to do something completely different. So the block of stone is the same, but the sculptor and the tools are also the same, but the sculptor will use it differently to create a different relief, to create a different form in that block of stone. So that is what Peter is trying to say over here with respect to language. Okay, now what is the kind of style he is advocating? He says frugal closeness of style, which makes the most of a word in the exaction from every sentence of a precise relief. So, and from here, the whole idea of economizing on words, of using minimum words to create maximum impact starts. So he says there should be a frugal closeness of style. Frugal, thrifty, miserly, less. So less use of words. So less words, but each word will give maximum meaning, which makes the most of a word. So that when the sentence happens, it comes out in sharp relief. So that, like sculpting, it is sharp, it will convey its message immediately. It is crisp, it is sharp. So, what you normally would take 10 lines to say, if you can say that in one line, that is style, according to Walter Pater. So, he says, of course, there are different classes of persons at different times who make very different demands upon literature. Now, here he talks about the reader. He says, of course, readers always have different expectations from literature. Sometimes they want to just be passionate about what they are reading. Sometimes they want it to be aesthetically appealing, right? Sometimes they are looking at it for a refuge, for a shelter. People who are displeased or disappointed with the real world out there, they want to seek refuge in literature. Literature becomes their shelter, literature becomes their alternative universe, that alternative retreat or refuge where they feel safe from a certain vulgarity in the actual world. And he goes on to use the example, like he says, a perfect poem like Lycidas, or a perfect fiction, or a perfect theory is sometimes as blissful as actually a religious retreat like a temple. So, and he says, when that becomes the kind of saving grace, then there will be no uncharacteristic or tarnished or vulgar decoration, permissible ornament being for the most part structural or necessary. So he says, then we have to look at minimalistic furnishing. We should remove ornamentation, we should remove excess. Excess is distracting, excess makes you digress from the point. So what we need is minimalism, what we need is something that is required, something that is a necessity to create maximum impact. And here he says, for in truth, all art does but consist in the removal of surplusage. Surplusage coming from the word surplus. So he says anything that is surplus, anything that is excess should be removed. And that is how art is created. So again, if we take the example of this block of stone and the sculptor working his or her way through the block of stone, what we realize is that if the carving is not done properly, then the work of art is not going to come out that beautifully, right? And here, in fact, Pater gives us the example of a gem cutter or a gem engraver. Someone who engraves, who kind of etches on gemstones, on precious stones. And if you see diamond cutters, a diamond needs to be cut, and it need to be cut at certain angles so that it can reflect maximum light. So the more light the diamond reflects, the more valuable the diamond is. But for the diamond to be able to reflect that kind of light, the cutter needs to be really sharp. The cutter as in not just the tool, but the person who is cutting it, because that is also an art. So when you remove unnecessary things, and when you fine tune, when you create sharp edges, that is when you create maximum luminosity, you create maximum light. So he explains us this, that how frugality matters, that the moment you leave something in excess, it dulls the impact of the text. So, like a diamond will shine only because it has sharp edges which will reflect light, so also a text will only shine if it has sharp words and sharp sentences, right? So he thus uses the metaphor of a gem engraver to suggest how art is chiseled to perfection. So for him, art writing is all about craftsmanship. It is a skill, right? By and this skill is accomplished or perfected by removing the unwanted. Okay, and now he moves on to his next point. So he says, so far, I have been speaking of certain conditions of the literary art arising out of the medium or material in or upon which it works. So he has been speaking about language. So long, right? That he's talking about the medium or the material that creates the literary art. But what literary art is even more dependent on, even more than language, is it is subservient to a more intimate quality of good style. More intimate means as coming nearer to the artist himself. So the artist needs to be emotionally invested in the literary work. And the artist needs to be not just invested but consistently invested. And look at what he says over here. That architectural conception of work which foresees the end in the beginning and never loses sight of it. So when the artist starts creating the work of art, they should be able to see the end result right at the beginning, and they should never lose sight of the end, because it is that end which is going to determine the journey, which is going to determine the shape, the texture, the form of the art. Okay, and in every part is conscious of all the rest till the last sentence does, but with undiminished vigor, unfold and justify the first. So, a work of art, a literary text should be that compelling, it should be that unified and that cohesive and that cogent that the last sentence should complement the first sentence. The first sentence of the book and the whole book and the last sentence, they should come together and they should integrate. There should be a kind of, they should be organically part of the book. And if that can be achieved, then that is a condition of literary art, right? So this is Walter Pater's idea of style, right? And then he quotes a thinker called Dean Mansell, and he says all the laws of good writing aim at a similar unity or identity of the mind in all the processes by which the word is associated to its import. So he says this is extremely important, that we kind of understand this unity, which is integral, which is absolutely indispensable to the work of art. And here I quote him again: the blithe, crisp sentence, decisive as a child's expression of its needs. So it has to be as candid. The sentence has to be as crisp, as candid, as clear as a child's expression of its needs. Children don't beat around the bush, right? If a child wants something, it will make it very clear what it wants. So the expression should be as frank as a child's needs, but this expression may alternate with the long contending, victoriously intricate sentence. The sentence born with the integrity of a single word, relieving the sort of sentence in which, if you look closely, you can see much contrivance, much adjustment to bring a highly qualified matter into compass at one view. For the literary architecture, if it is to be rich and expressive, involves not only foresight of the end in the beginning, but also development or growth of design in the process of execution, with many irregularities, surprises, and afterthoughts. So he says, even if you are alternating, or mixing and matching short, crisp sentences with longer, descriptive, elaborate, and decorative sentences, all parts should make the whole. So some places, if you imagine a building, right? Some places it's very intricately carved and some places there's just a little bit of blank wall. Imagine a palace or imagine the Taj Mahal, right? So some places you have such beautiful reliefs, you have beautiful relief work, you have beautiful carvings, but some places are just left blank because as a viewer, as a spectator, as an admirer of art, we also need that relief. So every sentence cannot be complicated and every sentence cannot be simple, but the combination needs to be a right balance of both. And and he th- here then he moves on to how the reader and the writer are in this journey together. So he says that the writer is actually the navigator who is gently hand holding and directing the reader to through the journey of the book. And the reader should get a sense of secure and restful progress. So the reader should not be hurried by the writer. The reader should be relaxed, get a sense of security, feel rested in reading the book, not reading the text, right? Not feel kind of pressured, or not be in a hurry or haste, readjusting mere assonances even, that they may soothe the reader. So even the audio quality of the text should be such that they should relax the reader, they should soothe the reader. So it's not just the arrangement of words, but also the sound of the words, the alliterative function, the euphonic function of the words, that need to have a kind of rhythm of their own and not interrupt the reader. And then somewhere before the end comes, is burdened, inspired with his conclusion, and betimes delivered of it, leaving off not in weariness, and because he finds himself at an end, but in all the freshness of volition. His work now structurally complete. So he says, and the writer needs to understand that this is a journey, and towards the end, the writer has to write in such a manner that the reader does not feel exhausted, the reader does not feel burdened, the reader feels inspired, the reader feels fresh, that yes, now I have come to the end, and I'm finishing it not because I'm tired or because the journey has been boring, but oh, I just want to get to the end and see how this ends. So there should be that freshness that is sustained till the very end.